This video is going to give you an overview of the design and features of Decimation, Kingdoms and Empires. This video is really tailored towards people interested in the game, who haven't played it yet, who haven't checked it out, who are thinking about maybe getting a copy of it and bring it to their table and have play. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we got here. So before we go anywhere else, I want to give a little cool disclaimer and a shout out to Victrix, because even though this video is not sponsored by them, I highly recommend you check out their line of models and miniatures, which are primarily designed for historical wargaming. Decimation, Kingdoms and Empires is a role-playing wargame, which means it's a game you can play as a role-playing game, or you can also play it as a war game. So these types of historically accurate miniatures dating all the way back to 2300 BC up to 1600s are ideal for playing the game. So go check out their website. Now, wherever possible, we're using images from some of the fan-created and fan-painted Victrix models, and we're going to give credit for those painters whenever it appears. So just up front, make sure you remember this isn't a sponsored video, but check out their stuff. So let's move on. So this game, it really is a basic idea of role-playing war game. There isn't one out there right now called a role-playing war game. It's kind of a new phrase we've coined with the development of this game. Why? I wanted to design and develop a melee martial-centric game system that evolved into something that was very specific with hit location and damage using different type of weapons and positioning that worked really, really well with 28mm models and miniatures that capture the same kind of tactical feeling you would have in D&D or role-playing games, and also have a progression system. So I discovered as we were designing and playtesting the game that you could play this game with 10 on 10, and it worked pretty well and pretty fast. So if you want to play it as a small skirmish game with wargaming rules, meaning like on a table without a grid and using a tape measure like you would Warhammer 40K, you can do that. All you have to do is ignore the progression rules. But it has a system in place that allows you to have different levels of heroes. For example, you can have command units versus just infantry, etc. But the original design is really going after that D&D player who wants to zero magic, historical theme adventure or a campaign, whether it's in ancient Egypt or to recreate the scenes in Braveheart or Gladiator or anything like that, any time frame in the pre-Black Powder era. So as I mentioned, grid and gridless. So a lot of war games, what people do is they have a large 4-foot by 6-foot table, has beautiful terrain, has all kinds of scatter terrain like fences and villages and shops and all kinds of stuff like that, rivers and bridges, to recreate the the diorama vibe of an actual to scale war game epic battle like Waterloo or gosh, there's millions of them. I won't even mention them. When you play a game like that without a grid, you use a little tape measure to measure between units. So the rule system supports that. And of course, it also supports the standard 1 inch equals 5 feet grid that you have in D&D and any kind of modern role-playing game. The core mechanics, I want to mention these. These are the innovative highlights that you won't see in any other role-playing game. So if you're a role-playing gamer here, this is where you want to pay close attention. You'll understand some of the language we've got here. Your traits matter, which are similar to ability scores in D&D. Your traits make a big difference. When you first develop your warrior character, your choices about where to assign your traits makes a difference, and there's trait growth over time. Your battle experience has a tremendous impact by bolstering your lethality. So the more experience in the battlefield someone is, 2 battles, 10 battles, 20 battles, and you've survived and you've won different types of encounters, you become much more lethal with your weapon of choice than you would be as a brand new recruit. It's a D100% chance mechanic, which means there's a target number and you want to roll under. This made me reminiscent of trying to hide in shadows or move silently, like we see in original D&D. Every single check in the game is oriented around a target number that you're trying to roll under. And in some situations, we're trying to roll really, really high to get very severe, nasty numbers for wounds and stuff like that. So melee combat, unlike any other RPG or even war game, is skill versus skill. We use opposing rolls for melee. The attacker and the defender are rolling at the table at the exact same time. They both have target numbers they're trying to hit, and we'll go into more detail on that in a few minutes. The distance between a ranged firing type of adversary versus your target has a huge impact on your accuracy. Distance truly matters. It isn't a situation, well, you're within 25 inches, you're in range, let's just fire. Because we aren't using firearms. We're using traditional martial range weapons such as crossbows, bows, slings, spears, etc. Hit location. You really, really can't have a visceral, gritty martial combat oriented role-playing game or war game scenario if you don't take in consideration the relationship between the weapons of the time and the armor of the time and why the armor is designed the way that it is and where it's located. Because the more lethal of a combatant you become, you're able to strike more lethal regions of the human body. Since everything in the game is about human beings, we're not using orcs and trolls and dragons. This is a very zero magic, historically fiction-oriented game. Hit location matters. As you become more powerful, you are able to be more accurate with your hit location and thus do more damage. Armor. Unlike a lot of D&D or role-playing games where we have an armor class, which is a general kind of conceptual idea of how good you are at defending, which really has nothing to do with mitigation whatsoever, we remove that from the formula and only let armor do what it historically was designed to do in the first place, which provides damage mitigation. Now, wearing different types of bulky armor has an effect on things like movement rates and how well you are able to react when you're defending in melee, but we'll get into that in more detail later when we talk about your melee defense. We use a universal D6 damage dice. 2D, 3D, 4D, 5D, 6D. That's because we have a mitigation system that will ignore lowest numbers based upon tiers of the weapon. Lastly, we have wound severity effects. Being struck a very strong and lethal and powerful blow up front is going to have a different effect on you than just being tat, tat, tat. So we remove away from the hit points as a block at hit points for a character that only when it gets to 0 does it matter. So being struck at certain levels along the way can cause you to be dazed, disoriented, maybe even knocked down and prone, which would make you susceptible to being killed. So these are the core ideas. And as you can see, the theme behind this is gritty, lethal, representing pretty much like real life would be, but it has elements to it that feel fantastical, so you can make warrior characters that can survive really great battles if you use tactical movement and tactical choices as to who to attack and when to attack, and working with allies. That's one of the key mechanics of the game, is playing, it's not a 1v1 PvP game, it's a group versus group. And how people prepare and attack in a group makes a big difference. Let's keep going. So we're going to get into the details of all these high-level traits now, high-level features. The game uses traits, like in standard role-playing games: strength, endurance, dexterity, agility, intelligence, resilience. There are reasons why we chose these values, not just to copy every other game that has 6, ability scores. We need to have a strength number, an endurance number, dexterity, agility, intelligence, resilience number, because we're going to derive all our melee attack, our ranged attack, our melee defense, our ability to become exhausted, how strong we are in certain situations, how are we able to resist being knocked down or being pummeled or being grabbed and grappled. All those things are going to come from your core physical and mental aptitudes, which we're calling traits. When you are making a warrior to play in a tabletop wargame battle, which may be like a heroic character, or a commander, or a general, or a colonel, or someone who's a great gladiator, or a hero like in Braveheart, like William Wallace, or if you're playing a role-playing game campaign where you and your 4 friends are the heroes and you have some additional soldiers with you, we have a trait modification table to make sure that your core numbers aren't super low and they get boosted up a little bit, because that will have an impact on your success in gameplay. We take all those core traits and we subdivide them into 3 thematic categories: a physique discipline, a prowess discipline, and a mental discipline. Now, these are just simple averages, but we refer back to these at a later date when we have things like action checks, or you're trying to resist a certain type of physicality movement where someone's trying to do something to you, when you're dazed and disoriented and trying to get back up, when someone's trying to grab you and hold you down. This is where this kind of saving throw idea comes into play. You have the ability to counter things in the game. So disciplines become a great point of reference that mean your traits matter and how you actually function up against such adversarial actions. Now, when you're creating a warrior character, there is a progression system. This also helps in a wargaming scenario when you want to create a heroic character. We use what's called battle ranks. Now, they have nothing to do with any kind of promotions or anything like that, or length of service. What we do is we count. It gives the game master an ability in a campaign or role-playing game scenario, the ability to reward you for surviving encounters. And the more encounters you survive successfully, you're going to get little tick marks that will raise your battle rank. Now, battle ranks go from rank 1 to rank 10 using Roman numerals. So 10 is extremely powerful, extremely experienced, and very lethal. These will improve your traits with every single battle rank after rank 5. And from these, we'll give you a good innate modifier. This general modifier will allow you to separate yourself out from just a general peasantry or conscripts. So if you're in a wargaming scenario and you have some conscripts and you have some Roman legionnaires, or you have some, in the War of the Roses, you have some knights in full plate mail, and you want them to be experienced warriors, that's where you can decide, well, I want to have 5 rank 5, knight footmen, and then I want to have 1 leader that's rank 10, and I want to have about 7 to 10, rank 2 guys. Or in a D&D style role-playing campaign, your progression rank is that you could start with battle rank 1 and do an entire adventure going across the Mediterranean, and after 3 or 4 hours of play, you might find yourself at rank 4 or rank 5. So these types of progression systems benefit both the role-playing game way to play and the wargaming way to play. Time. Now, we're going to get into more mechanics here, and this is just to give a sense of how the game mechanics are a little different from what you may expect. We have 2 types of ways to measure time. One is campaign, and one is tactical. Campaign time really comes from the role-playing game world where people are traveling great distances, and time passes as quickly as a sentence. It's not a situation where you're having to move miniatures across the board or anything like that. You might be traveling on horseback for half a mile, sleeping, packing supplies on ship for a few hours. Role-playing game scenarios have a lot of this, campaign time. But when combat starts, right, when there's going to be a situation where 2 enemy combatants are aware of each other, in visual range, attacking and moving, we go back down to tactical time. Tactical turns are broken up into 4 seconds each, and there's 15 of them in a minute. So every single tactical turn is when all the player actions are going to happen and how we resolve combat and movement. Now, distance and movement, we divide distances up into range bands because this affects things such as movement, how far you can move, and also things that affect your ranged ability. So when someone's over 100 feet, they go from long to very long range. This allows us to have a simple word that makes sense going point blank to extreme range to kind of give us a sense of how far away your target is. Now, if you're playing on a wargaming table, you're with no grid, you're using a tape measure to measure, and if you're on a 1 inch equals 5 feet grid, you're able to see the number of 1 inch squares you have. Now, distance and movement, your armor can affect this, and there's different ways to move. Characters don't do that. Warrior characters don't have just a flat movement rate of just run 25 feet at all the time. You can be moving very silently, you can be advancing, you can be charging, you can even be sprinting trying to get out of there. Those different movement rates are affected by the armor type that you have. This is one element of armor besides mitigation that has an impact on your choices, which is primarily about your mobility level and how long you can sustain that level of mobility. The lighter the armor, the less exhausted you're going to be, right? Now, we don't have a situation where someone's so exhausted they can't move anymore. We don't have anything like that. But these base numbers give you a sense tactically to figure out, hey, we're attacking a guy in field plate. He's not going to be able to really escape this fight. Let's surround him. Or the other way around, you're in field plate and you see enemies encroaching on you and you know they're going to outrun you, so you need to make a different type of tactical decision of how to deal with it. So distance and movement has a tremendous impact on the gameplay, a tremendous impact on your success in fighting, and it's a tool you can use to make sure you're not being interrupted or being grabbed or grappled or overpowered, etc. The next action we need to talk about is really more on the role-playing game side, but you could use these for different types of checks as well at the wargaming table. This is called action, trait, and discipline checks. Now, you heard me say earlier disciplines using the 3 different disciplines, but at the very basic level, any kind of creative action that a player wants to do, and there's literally hundreds of thousands of things that a player could say. I want to jump off my horse and grab my shield off the side of my horse. That's pretty heroic. That's what something you might see in a film. Or someone wants to dive off the horse and roll on the ground at full gallop and not break their neck. Or someone's trying to force a door open and don't care about how loud it is, versus someone trying to force a door open but not be loud. These types of subtle nuances give the players complete creative freedom to describe and articulate exactly what they're trying to achieve, and it gives a way for the game master to say, okay, in my mind, that seems like a pretty challenging thing to do, to force the door open without it being noisy. If you tell me you're just going to force the door open, I'm going to call it routine. So these gives you percentage target numbers to target. Say, okay, give me a routine action difficulty check to bust a door open, right? Or, oh, you want to try to be quiet? That's fine. I'm going to call this challenging, so you have about 20% chance to succeed that. So here's where some of the progression elements come into play. The higher your battle rank, you're going to be able to modify this number with your battle rank and 8 modifier. And then the discipline modifier might affect. So your game master might say, if you're trying to forcing a door open and you're just going to bust it open and don't care about how much noise you make, that's pretty much going to be a physique discipline modifier. So you would look at those 2 numbers, combine them together, and that increases your target number. It's a really simple concept. 45% chance to rain today, right? Everyone understands that anything from 45 to 0-1 is going to be, it's going to rain for sure. Now, secondly, we have trait and discipline checks. These are much more purist. You have situations where it has no modifiers to it all. It's just a simple check. Hey, just check your agility to make sure you can get across this beam without falling down. You're trying to run and grab and jump onto a chariot as it's moving by at a medium canter speed. I'm going to give that like an agility check. So roll your agility or less. The second thing is you might have something that requires 2 traits, like the physique, or the prowess, or the mental discipline, like you're trying to tell a lie to someone. That's a little bit of resilience, a little bit of intelligence. And of course, if you want to, you can create your own discipline checks by combining any of the traits you want to together. This type of system gives one-page flexibility to resolve anything that players can ever come up with. And that's one thing about when I was designing this game, make sure it was really, really clear. I wanted to capture that old school AD&D, first and second edition vibe, where all those creative actions are described by the players at the table, but they aren't bogged down with skill and feat checks and athletics checks and all those kinds of things. Those things are great for the other role-playing games. There's nothing wrong with them, but I really wanted to kind of tailor the system down to the game master is experienced. The game master knows how to decide these types of things. Give them the power to do something that seems reasonable, seems fair. Let's get into combat. Combat in Decimation, Kingdoms and Empires is very lethal, but it has some interesting concepts that have never been in any other games, which you might find to be really fun. One of the first things is we pre-calculate all the values ahead of time on your character sheet. So your ability to strike targets with melee weapons is innate to you. It has nothing to do with who your adversary is, except for the fact he has a melee defense So he has a target number to defend any melee attack that he's aware of, and you have a target number for any ability for you to strike someone. You do opposing rolls to see if you both succeed successfully. This is something about mixed martial arts and the UFC or Bellator or whatever you want to do, or the LFA, that's really important. In mixed martial arts, combat, it can go either way if you make a minor mistake. Someone who's the greatest striker in the world, no one is truly undefeated, right? Unless they're a wrestler or something. No one's truly undefeated in striking. So we wanted to kind of capture that vibe, like it's still tense. You're not guaranteed, all I need to do is roll a 3 or higher and a d20, I always hit this hill giant. We really wanted every single combat situation to feel like it's on the edge of being, I could get hit here and killed within a few seconds if I'm not careful. Now, how do we handle that? When you're attacking and someone else is defending, you have opposing rolls. The result of that roll is 4 different possibilities. And we call that momentum. And momentum is a way for you to gain the upper hand and be able to attack next. It's not a counterattack mechanic. It's a way for you to gain, seize control of the situation. You strike someone, they fail to defend, you do some damage. You strike someone, they defend, you go back to starting over again. You take a strike at someone and you damage them and they fail to defend, and then you gain momentum, you get to strike again. And until they defend successfully, you have this momentum change. And we talk about that with the next slide. Another element we want to talk about is, we've heard before, was that hit location makes a big difference. And that's going to be increased by your expertise, and that's going to influence how much damage you do. We're not doing damage based on weapon type, right? So when you're getting a combat encounter, we have the very first thing that happens is called an action call. This is the individual character or warrior deciding what to do, right? Because on a game table, whether it's a war game or a role-playing game, we can't have everyone doing everything at the exact same time, but this is a way for us to simulate how real-life actions happen simultaneously. The way the action call works is people at the front lines get to say and announce what their action call is going to be. Say you're at the front line, you're a Gaul warrior dual wielding hatchets or something, and you want to attack this one Roman centurion that doesn't have a shield because you may have a better chance of attacking him. You say, I want to attack this guy here, I want to charge at him and get in his face and attack him. Then that centurion, he may be able to call what he wants to do. He may see you coming. I want to defend against anyone that charges towards me. That's what you do with an action call. You're stating what you want to do, and you have to commit to it. You can't change your mind afterwards. The reason why you do it at the front line is because people are in closer proximity to each other, and people in the back lines can see what's happening, and then for 1 second more decide to change their action. So if you're in the back lines and you're a ranged person, or you're about to charge in, you're a cavalry guy, or you just happen to be behind your group in the front lines of the battle, you can see where people are doing things, and maybe I'm going to try to flank around the side and get a good shot with my crossbow. Now, once everyone's announced what they're going to do with their action call, Then there's the actual roll to see how well we do it in what order. This is called a first action roll. It happens at the beginning of every single tactical turn. Every single tactical turn has this. We don't roll for initiative once and have an initiative order forever. This is because who gets to go first has a tremendous impact on whether you live or die, or whether you get wounded, or whether you can react to it. Now, it sounds kind of brutal, but your traits, your experience, they all give you the overall period of time you're going to be more successful the more experienced you are. So it gives us multiple rolls, not just that one bad roll that happened on initiative and you don't have a chance anymore, right? So this situation, you want a high number. It's called the speed. So you take your prowess discipline and you add your battle rank innate modifier. High rolls win. That determines who gets to go in what order. Let's keep going here. So in combat, yes, there's all kinds of actions. Some of the typical actions that take one tactical turn or more are things like wait, and you get a benefit where you get plus 50 to your next first action roll. You could stand up from being knocked down or prone, or move, silent movement, different types of movements. You could bandage a wound on yourself or an ally. So we've got which ones take how long. Some take one tactical turn, like doing a melee attack, or reloading a ranged weapon such as a crossbow. It takes 2 tactical turns. This is not an unusual concept for people used to role-playing games. We have a very general thing like use your hands as a catch-all for things, for everything from grabbing a torch, helping an ally to a feat, open a door, untie a knot, etc. Now, the reason why we list these types of actions is so you can understand, okay, I can only perform one action in my tactical turn, which is only 4 seconds. But there are situations where if you move half your movement, you can still attack. Disrupt attacks. This is an interesting take. For many, many years, the attack of opportunity has been something that's been a big argument. Our solution to this, thinking about combat just from a martial combat perspective, is that if someone moves within 5 feet of a stationary combatant, all right? Let's just say you're standing still. Directly in front of you is a square. To the northeast is a square. Let's say you're facing north. The northwest is a square, and then to the left is a square, and to the right is a square. So you have this forward 180-degree frustum that is your facing direction. So if you look at these Normans painted by Martin Brooke, directly in front of these guys is their front-facing direction. If someone moves within that sphere of influence, but is not attacking you, you get a chance out of order to choose to do 2 types of disrupt attacks. One is just a good old-fashioned melee attack. The person that's moved into the square adjacent to you has the option of attempting to defend the melee attack, and then it's just a normal attack rotation, or they could choose to try to continue their previous action, which might be just run past. It might be shoot the crossbow. It might be try to grab someone, etc. Now, the second action you can do are much more physical. Someone's close to you in combat. So pummeling, kicking, tripping, grabbing, pushing, or slam. These non-lethal attacks have a different way of determination and a different way of being defended against based upon what they are. The disrupt attack is strength and dexterity divided by 2 and your battle rank innate modifier. Let's look at these super briefly. Pummel is striking with your fist. It does a lot of damage when someone's on the ground. Kicking is trying to kick someone away from you out of your square. For example, in the kick, in order to succeed, I have to do an agility trait check, or I'll fall prone in the next adjacent 5-foot square. On a successful agility trait check, the attacker stumbles backwards 1 5-foot square. These types of disrupt attacks have pluses and minuses to doing them. They are a risk. The percentage chances to succeed and to defend are usually quite high. So you have these situations where someone's trying to trip you as you run by. If they miss the trip, they might find themselves out of position, and then another combatant on your team can wipe them out. So these are the things about movement that's really, really tricky. You may want to try to stop someone from doing something. You have a friend who's really wounded. He's trying to disengage. Disengage movement's very slow. Someone's coming after him. You may attempt to grab them, right? So these are the types of things you can do to change what's happening in close proximity on the battlefield, especially in melee. Some of the other ones are like slamming and grabbing someone, like doing a takedown. So the key concept here, let's repeat it. Anytime an enemy moves within 5 feet square of a stationary combatant, but it's not attacking that stationary combatant, presents an opportunity for the stationary combatant to perform a disrupt attack. So if someone like this Viking painted by Von Hornsby moves up to me, but he's attacking me, I don't get a chance to disrupt this. This is just a standard opposing roll type of his attack versus my attack, right? So I can do lethal versions of this and non-lethal versions. So let's go into the actual normal type of combat, right? We have Your individual ability to strike a target is based upon your innate talents, which take into consider your strength, your hand coordination, dexterity, your intelligence, which affects how well you are to maximize in timing and prediction, and your 5 senses. And we also include your battle rank innate modifier, which helps you progress and become more lethal. This determines your target number you must roll under in order to successfully succeed in a melee attack. Melee defense takes into consideration your dexterity and your hand, your whole body coordination, your agility, and your intelligence, and your battle rank innate modifier. This gives you a target number that says, while I'm aware you're attacking me and I'm ready to defend, this is my chance to successfully execute a defense. This gives you a situation where there's different outcomes, and this is called momentum. If I'm successful attacking you and you're successful at defending, the attack is defended. Now, then we go back to the first action roll and all that. But the reason why this is interesting is because it will temporarily reduce the melee defender's defense by 5 each time it happens. So it can never be lower than your endurance divided by 5. But every single time you successfully defend an attack, that when the attack has been positive and your roll is positive, you start becoming more and more tired or exhausted. And we have rules for that. If you attack and you don't succeed and I defend successfully, I gain momentum. Momentum means now it's my turn, right? And this goes back and forth. If the attacker is successful and the defense is not successful, you've determined to hit location, start doing damage, right? And when someone is struck, their melee defense is dropped by 20% temporarily until that momentum is lost. This is one thing that's really, really interesting in the game. Things can flip on a dime with a couple of tricky rolls. But overall, the averages are that more experienced higher battle rank combatants usually end up better off. They have more survivability because the numbers are working in their favor overall. If you successfully attack and you fail and the defender fails, nothing happens and we go back to the first action roll. So remember, posing rolls, 4 possible outcomes. Momentum is very powerful. That's where the defender can find himself in a bad situation. Exhaustion. We just mentioned this. You can never get your melee defense lowered below your endurance divided by 5. It's just a simple formula. And for example, we have a character in the rule book, Loey, has an endurance of 89. If you divide that by 5, it's 17.8. We always round up. That gives us 18. No matter what happens, he can never have his melee defense lowered below 18. And once again, that's his target number. It takes a while for that to happen. You have to have a number of situations where you successfully defended a successful attack. You'll find that if you're playing the game at the table, there's a lot of things you can do to mitigate and make it harder for people to hit you if you play very tactically and you work as a team. Let's talk about ranged attacks. Ranged attacks are very different. We don't have an opposing roll. Your ability to grab a weapon, any ranged weapon, is weapon agnostic except when we come to range, is only 20% plus your battle rank innate modifier, which is a relatively low percentage chance. But then it depends on how far away the target is. Is using throwing daggers, a long and a composite bow, a short bow, heavy crossbow. Every weapon's designed to work in a certain distance. Like we're not going to hit someone with a sling at very long range, but we could hit someone at long range with a short bow, but we might be hard pressed to hit someone at long range with throwing axes. So some weapons are very accurate at short and medium and long range, but it usually tapers off, and some even have like an extreme, negative chance to hit whatsoever. Like in most role-playing games, anytime you roll from 0-1 to 0-5 is considered a success. So if you have a negative 10% chance to do something successfully, if you roll a 0-1 to 0-5, you always succeed. Not rolling a 100, that's at the opposite end of the spectrum. So the key concept about ranged attacks is there's really only 2 ways to defend against them. One, you need to be aware of who's, let's just say shooting a bow at you, right? If you have a shield, you can say, I'm going to try to block anyone that shoots a ranged attack at me. So when this guy over here to the far left, this Gaul archer, like the guy in the front here painted by Max Ferraro, tries to take a shot at you, you are automatically able to see that as long as you're at 180 degree frustum and you aren't distracted. That will reduce his chance to hit you by 45%. The other thing you can do if you have no shield is attempt to evade, which means you're fighting and you see someone get ready to throw something at you, they're going to shoot a bow at you, they're trying to grab a javelin and chunk it from far range, you see it flying through the air, you can try just to roll out of the way or just take a step and get out of the way or just do a little head movement and slip it. That's only 25%. But you got to be able to announce these things. And if you don't announce those type of actions, you are susceptible to being struck, especially at short, medium, and long range. Being struck, your only defense is going to be the damage mitigation of your armor. There's no other way to defend against ranged attacks. But here's what's tricky. Ranged attacks begin in the first tactical turn, but they don't fire until the beginning of the next tactical turn. So imagine like you pull out the bow, you hold it up, you knock an arrow, you aim and release. That's about 4 seconds. That arrow doesn't actually get loosed and fly out the blow until the beginning of the next tactical turn. So if you can close the distance on someone using a ranged weapon, you can shut down their ability to actually get that shot off. They are not able to stand there directly in front of you and start using a sling when someone's hitting you with a mace, okay? That's an element of the tactical positioning of martial combat in the ancient world that's very important. Archers are always susceptible to being trampled on by cavalry or jammed in the face by people attacking at close range. If you're playing an archer or a ranged type of weapon user or using just one, you need to make sure that you're taking into consideration, hey, that's a target and field plate. There's no way they can charge to me. I can just take my shot from right here. It's my best chance to hit. If you don't understand what your adversaries are wearing, you may find yourself, oh my gosh, these guys are on top. There's 3 guys on top of me. I've been taken down. I'm dead. So that's the thing about the game that's very, very lethal. Requires you to think about your chess piece, your warrior, or what you're trying to do. Let's take a look at mounted combat. Yes, in the ancient world, chariots in the ancient world were really common in North Africa. Later on, these things kind of faded away and turned into light cavalry, then heavy cavalry. Cavalry's been around forever. Early Roman light cavalry you see here as Victrix models are absolutely amazing, right? Now, all we really do to keep things really simple here is we reduce your hit chance based on whatever you're doing, whether you're using bows, crossbows, and lances, or two-handed melee or one-handed melee, based upon the speed of the horse. We're going to assume that you've been trained to ride a horse and use a weapon in one hand, a shield in the other, like these guys are here. If you're going to ride up to someone and take a swipe of them, are you at a trot? Are you at a full gallop? I mean, it may be very difficult for you to pull that swing off, but man, if you hit, that's really, really nasty because your ability to escape being counterattacked. Now, hit location. You've heard me mention this. I absolutely love this system. It is very fun. Hit location thrives around high numbers. Low numbers don't do much damage. High numbers, it's hard to get the high numbers because it's scaled. It's not a typical little simple bell curve, right? This is something where rolling a 70 is not going to be a lethal wound. You want 81s and higher, 71s and higher. So your battle rank innate modifier, if you have any kind of accuracy bonus from what you're doing, which comes from flanking and attacking people unaware, that's where you can get a bonus to this roll. But your hit location table, when you roll this, it determines where you get struck. Like maybe you roll a 31, that gives you a lower leg. Maybe you roll 50% for the left leg, 50% for the right leg, excuse me. And then you say, okay, great, you've been hitting the lower leg. That has no major severity modifier. Now what happens with that? You take the severity modifier from this table and then you apply it to the wound severity table on the right. So you want high numbers, which are targeting very lethal and susceptible to damaging parts of the human body, right? Then we see what kind of wounds you have. So this is where another set of values come into place. It can be just a graze, a light wound, a serious, critical, and devastating. And as you can see, damage dice go up. So hit location, you want high numbers. But the wound severity, it does take into consideration your expertise. Remember how I said that you have an increase in lethality based upon your experience, your battle rank? This is where the severity modifier taken from the previous table and your long-term expertise is going to modify the numbers on this roll. You are more lethal the more experienced you are at martial combat. Now, you might have an interesting effect that happens to you. Not only are we doing damage to people, we have to understand what happens next. Everyone's considered to have kind of 30 wound points, all human beings. We're breaking this down into kind of a system where not one person has 41 hit points and someone else has 17. We don't do that, right? Whether you have really low strength and low agility and low resilience, it doesn't matter. You still have 30 wound points. We use this to set a tier of where things start becoming very nasty for the human body. Like you might be, if you take this much damage within one tactical turn, you might have a wound threshold effect applied to you. For example, let's say 2 guys attack you in one tactical turn. One guy hits you with a mace, the other guy spears you with a spear, and you take 27 points of damage. You could be dazed. Now, dazed is like being stunned, a flash knockout where you're on your feet, and there's effects for these. You might get knocked down. You might get knocked down and dazed for 8 seconds. You might get knocked down and unconscious, being susceptible to being immediately killed. But if you get hit for 20 and then you get hit for 10 and then 14, what you're doing then is you don't have any impairments, right? You're wounded, but you're a warrior and you can handle this. But if those numbers go over your total cumulative level, that's when you start tracking the wound threshold table as well. So there's 2 things happening here. how much damage you take immediately in one tactical turn, and what the cumulative damage is on you. So you're tracking up the damage, and as you approach 30, once you get above 30, that's where things get nasty. You can get hit for a total of 34 points of damage over the course of 2 or 3 combat rounds, being tactical turns, and not be dead. Like, you can still get to your feet. If if your ally has protected you and you recover from being knocked down and dazed, you can still fight. What you really want to do is hit that 45 number threshold. That is when someone is instantly killed with no possibility of survival, right? That's where it gets really, really nasty. Now, these types of effects, the cumulative damage you heard me mention that. These pagans painted by Alex Barclay, these Russian pagans, are amazing. There's rules for this. Everything's described to you. It tells you what it's like. What happens to you. Your melee defense might get lowered. You might get knocked down. That's why it's important to work as a group like these pagan Russians are right here, right? They're working as a group. The guys in the front with the 2 shields, there's a leader on one side, there's a dual wielder, a guy with a 2-handed weapon in the back. If the guys in the front line knock someone down and get them knocked down, that 2-handed guy can just chop them and do a lot of damage. Now, we have rules for that too, right? But let's go and talk about the damage and mitigation. Armor always seems to make a big difference, right? And throughout warfare, beginning with the ancient Egyptians all the way up to, the 1500s, right before black powder really hit the stage, right after the cannon and after Francis I crossed the Alps and invaded Marignano into the Lombardy plain. The War of the Roses, for example, these Agincourt knights, full plate mail, was designed to protect you certain levels of types of damage, right? They didn't have full plate mail in ancient Egypt or Assyrians or the Roman Empire. They didn't have full plate mail. They had certain types of armor they would use. The armor you have and where you wear it is a function of damage mitigation. If someone comes at you with a sword and hits you for 3D damage because they've hit you in a certain region, if you have a certain type of chain mail on and someone's going to roll the 3D dice, dice 1, dice 2, dice 3, anything that's a 1 or a 2 is ignored because your armor's protected you. That's how we handle mitigation, which gives it a little bit to chance, right? You're rolling those dice, you want to get 6s, right? I want 6s, I want 6s. We all know the odds of you rolling all 6s all the time is low, and there's averages. So the more bulky and thick and well-designed, heavier armor, it may protect you well, but you're going to sacrifice movement because we give you a defense penalty. As you get above ring mail, you start having your melee defense number, your target number dropped a little bit. So you have to balance out, okay, do I want to be like this heavily armored for this time frame? Say you're playing in the year 1350, right? You've got a cool campaign, you're attacking a keep, or you're trying to destroy a patrol or steal something, whatever you're trying to do, and you say, listen, I want our noble lord, he's given you full sets of field plate for everyone to wear. You're going to be able to mitigate 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4 in damage mitigation, but your melee defense, which might be 80, is going to be dropped down to 50 because you have this defense penalty. So you're not as good at moving and reacting to very flashy type of attacks. That's the concept behind the heavier armor. You also, if you're on foot, you can't move as quickly, but you're not like a lumbering, awkward sumo wrestler or something in a puff outfit. You're not going to have that kind of a problem. You still have good mobility, but someone who is wearing no armor or even just leather armor is going to outrun you and be able to outmaneuver you, so you need to have allies with you. So the mitigation rule is really interesting. Anything that you consider to do with your characters, your different time frame, whatever you're playing, whether it's a war game or it's a role-playing game situation, you need to take in consideration, like, what kind of armor do I really want to use? Is chainmail going to work for me? Give me a little bit of mitigation, but I don't lose a lot of my melee defense, a lot of my movement. So it makes a difference, right? And this is the whole rock, paper, scissors, yin and yang, cavalry versus archers type of relationship that we see in military history throughout the ancient world. Shields. You got to have rules for shields. Romans using shields, Roman conscripts with shields, Vikings with shields, shield walls, all these types of things. Just like the phalanx and the pike became a big deal in the 1400s and later on. What we do with shields is very interesting. We give you a big bonus to your melee-based defense number. So you could be a situation where you have over 100 melee defense bonus, but you can never, ever, ever, never gain momentum. And the reason being is the shield is a very big and awkward item to use, and if you're focusing on defending all the time and you're successfully defending, remember, you start losing exhaustion. So just being able to defend is great up front, but over time, all those successful defenses sometimes it's better off just to get cut in the leg than to constantly defend all the time, because if your attacker is rolling and hitting and hitting and hitting, and they're bashing and bashing and bashing on your shield, and you're successfully defending, your melee defense is going to go down by 5, 5, 5, 5. And that's where things like wooden shields get nullified after 3 tactical turn attacks, where things like tower shields from the Roman Empire are tremendously beneficial. So you have to take in consideration that. So if your attacker is constantly succeeding, and you're succeeding in blocking, you will get chipped away. Now, it is certainly better than having nothing, because we don't use any kind of parry ability. That's where your melee base defense number, it comes into play and takes into consideration your ability to defend with parrying or deflecting or moving out of the way. So that's one thing about shields, is a little bit different. You don't really get an opportunity to gain momentum. Other than that, it's the same type of rules. Now, flanking. This is really, really critical rule. We have a facing direction as human beings. We can see our peripheral vision, and we can see in front of us. We call it about 180. When you have your miniatures and models placed on the grid or on the battlefield, which way you're facing determines where your flanks are, which means from behind. When someone's attacking you from behind, you can't defend against them. Now, there are rules in place that describe you don't just stand there and face the wrong way while someone comes up from the side. No one's going to run towards you and swing around behind you and flank you. That just doesn't happen. But if you're being attacked from someone from behind and you don't see them coming, that person gets bonuses to their accuracy, which affects the hit location. That doesn't mean their chance to hit's going to get better. Their chance to do more lethal damage to you is going to be better. So in this case, a chance to hit a melee attack from an attacker is boosted by 50%. This doesn't mean you're completely unaware, right? And there is a rule in place called a one-step that allows you to change direction. If you can see and you can tell that someone's trying to flank you, you can adjust your position. So flanking is very, very important. It has a big impact on accuracy in the game. Now we have a target awareness table. If you're not actively defending but you're aware, the bonus to hit is only 25%. The accuracy bonus is 15. And we have, if you're flanked, it's 50%, and the accuracy bonus is 20. If you're unaware, completely unaware, 50 and 30. And if you're completely defenseless, like knocked down and prone or whatever, you might have a plus 100% guaranteed chance to hit someone lying on the ground who's defenseless, with much more higher chance of injuring someone. And we have the shot here from John Barrett, painted this Anglo-Dane, another late Saxon Victrix miniature, which kind of shows, like, if you're looking at a miniature on the table, like this is, you're looking at him directly from 90 degrees to his right side. So just to the back is the flank, and to the front is where his forward defending area is. So these things are important. We are a tactical game, right? You can do theater of the mind, but you need to have something to represent people's facing direction, right? Because the majority of the gameplay is combat-centric. There are rules for other types of situations if you're playing as a role-playing game with all the action checks and the discipline checks and the trait checks to help what player actions are. But when it gets down to gritty martial combat, that's where the tactics happen, right? Dual wielding. Now, in fantasy novels and Hollywood films, we see lots of people running around with dual-wield weapons. In history, there's only a few instances of it, but we do know that a lot of Vikings, look at this great guy here painted by John Barrett at Victrix, you can dual-wield, but we have very restrictive rules on it. It needs to be a very light weapon, like an axe, a short sword, knife, or a dagger. It's not effective to dual-wield 2 long swords, okay, despite what you see in Dritz Stewart novels, right? And you also need to have a minimum strength, dexterity, and agility to not suffer any penalties. Now, when you attack with them, you also, it's a little bit harder to do this. You have to say, I want to attack with both weapons, and you're going to have a minus 20% on your melee base to hit in the main hand and minus 30 for the offhand. So dual wielding, yes, it does give you a chance to roll twice, one with the main hand and one with the offhand. You might actually hit someone twice, but you have all these other criteria that you're working with, right? Successful dual-wielding attacks, you suffer a minus 25 accuracy penalty on hit location. So you're not able to be as lethal as someone just using a gladius. Someone using a gladius and a shield can target that chest, try to puncture that chest cavity, right? When you're dual-wielding, you're hacking at that general area, making sure your weight is not off balance so then the second weapon can come in. It's a completely different animal, right? That's why when people do boxing, they do combinations. They aren't going both hands at the same time. Now, they can do it very quickly, but there's a reason for that. So in dual-wielding, you're going one hand, one hand, one hand, one hand. That's why we have these type of rules in place. It sometimes can be a disadvantage because you're not as accurate and you're not as lethal, but you do have this situation where you can do 2 attacks. We have advanced rules for all the weapons. I'm just going to briefly flip through these because I have a separate video on it. But what we do, we don't have special attacks. Like you don't have, flying falcon dagger attack or anything like that. You're not picking actions like in 4th edition D&D or in massively multiplayer MMOs where you're using whirlwind and things like that. These are normal weapons. You're warriors. You're trained to use these weapons. The weapon is designed to do certain types of things. Some weapons are good at doing one thing and some weapons are good at doing another. So for knives and daggers, they're faster. They're not good at defending. If you use them from behind, you can do more damage. You can hit unarmored regions and receive and do a bleed damage, etc. Short swords, if used from behind, they're more accurate. They can stab unarmored regions and get severity bonuses. They're designed to point into narrow slots in people's armor, and you can slash people that don't have armor and cause bleed effects. It's very straightforward. Double-edged longswords like this unarmored Gallic warrior painted by Paul Green, which is totally awesome miniature. I wish I could paint my miniatures that good. These guys are so good. It's so inspirational to see these miniatures painted this way. Longswords are heavy. They're not as fast. They have a good melee defense modifier because a big heavy longsword used properly, it allows you to parry much better. They don't have an accuracy bonus, but they can ignore damage mitigation 1 if they do a puncturing attack, which is like a stab. Stab to armor regions receive +10 on the wound severity roll. They're designed to penetrate armor when you do that. If you do slashes to unarmed regions, it can cause bleeds. Single-edged and curved swords like katanas, right? You might be playing an Asian campaign in feudal Japan in the Sengoku era. You might be playing Persians with scimitars, right? There's all kinds of curved weapons throughout history. They are designed for slashing. They're not really a puncturing weapon. They have, statistics and things that they can do as well. Maces and Morning Stars, they're not as fast. You can't really defend with short maces and Morning Stars. They can ignore damage mitigation 1 and 2. If you hit someone in unarmed regions, you can crush and break bones. So it's all kinds of nasty things. You hit someone in the foot or the hand, the bicep, that person has to make a resilient trait check or have that area crushed and broken, which will reduce their melee defense. Axes, you could sever things. How many times have we seen someone get their arm cleaved off by a guy using an axe? They're good on speed. They're very fast. Hatchets and axes are fast. They're not as accurate and they're not as good at melee defense, but man, they're good at cleaving someone. And here's another Viking painted by Paul Green. Isn't that just freaking amazing? I love it. So pole weapons. All throughout history, there's been pole weapons, right? Now we have different kinds. We have spears and we have pole weapons. There's a lot of different types of pole weapons throughout military history. Bardaches, bills, all kinds of ones. But as a rule, the general function of a pole weapon that has a different type of blade attached on the end, whether it's a piercing blade or a chopping blade like a halberd, etc., like an axe blade, it gives you different benefits. It's slower on the speed roll, it's slower on accuracy, it's really bad for your melee defense, but you can strike people over 5 feet away, and you can ignore damage mitigation, and you can dismount riders. You can trip someone running by from a distance, you got to call it, and there's some different ways for the defender to see if they get knocked prone. Spears, the same kind of thing, but not as good as the tripping. Spears are thrusting weapons. They're not really designed to go out there and hook someone and grab the back of the leg or slash some guy. They're not usually designed like they're always a puncturing weapon, and they're very fast. So they give you a big fast bonus, but they're not good at defending. If you're only holding a spear in 2 hands, like Boudica here, painted by John Barrett, I mean, you're gonna have a tough time. You might get your whole wooden haft chopped in half. So two-handed swords, axes and aces, listen to me. Two-handed swords, axes, and maces. Your speed modifier, much slower. Melee defense, really sacrificed. But they can ignore damage mitigation of 1, 2, 3, and 4. But you can't gain momentum. So do you want to do a massive, powerful strike that's guaranteed to hit someone and do damage no matter what, right? Even though they have armor on? And sacrifice the fact that you can never gain momentum. Your adversary might gain momentum, and then because you have such bad melee defense, might just overpower you and go bam, 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 and you're out. So this is something that you have to take in consideration. All these weapons throughout history are this yin and yang relationship between what the defender has and what the attacker has. And there's nothing wrong with you having a two-handed sword on your back and a sword and shield in your hand, or an axe and a shield. So these are where the decisions need to make on how you want to play. When you're painting miniatures and going to play a war game type of scenario with these rules, you're going to try to stay conformed to what happens in that time period, right? Your Norse Viking guys are going to have kinds of wild weapons like this. They're not going to be running around wearing plate mail, right? So let's talk about the advanced rules from a key conceptual perspective. These come with tremendous offensive capabilities, but with trade-offs, so choose wisely. Think of things like the speed, the melee defense, the accuracy. Remember, accuracy affects hit location only. It doesn't mean whether you hit. Momentum, multiple targets, break bones, sever extremities, ignore mitigation, cause bleeds. So the advanced rules, which are optional, get into nitty-gritty, and when you start playing, get really good at it, you will change what you do based upon the weapon your opponent is showing. And that is a really fun relationship. It's almost like chess. You know, when you see 3 Viking guys running forward with 2-handed weapons, you know that their melee defense is going to be bad, but you know they're going to jam on your armor. Do 2 of you focus fire them one at a time? Boom, 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 and get all 4 of these guys rushing at you down really quickly? Is this a situation where you want to drop your bow and pull off a shield and pull out your gladius, etc.? Those tactical situations mean much more in this game than they would in a standard role-playing game. So let's just summarize everything here together. I know it's been a long video, but I wanted someone who is really interested in trying to understand like what the differences between this game is and the game system, why they are that way, so you can see some of the logic behind it, and why we try to create systems that are really fast and play really well for 2 ways to play. If you're a wargamer and you want to play a small little skirmish battle 4-on-4 or 8-on-8, and you create the heroic leader of your little group, you might have a heroic leader and a second command. You roll those characters up. You might just say, hey, listen, I'm going to have all rank 5 knights and a rank 10 lord, and I'm going to be attacking, you know, your Persians that are painted here by Dirk Heinesius. You know, he might have a bunch of Persians attacking in Jerusalem, right? You can play as a role-playing game with a game master who creates a whole campaign and a storyline. You might, you know, reenact scenes like you see in the movie Gladiator or in Braveheart, or etc., whatever you like, right? Or you might just have a wargaming battle between 8 guys, which you could take and have over with in an hour and a half. So it really is up to you, which is really fun, because I think the thing that's missing from wargaming is that close face-to-face tactical decision-making that makes you feel like you're really there. And we watch a film of people fighting in melee, you know, like in Gladiator, right? And they're making a sequel to that movie, I believe. You're worried that the character's going to get hurt. You need to think that way when you're playing. When you're playing a war game, you're reenacting a classic battle between a lot of units. It's more about the generalship and the tactics of the field mobility of multiple units working together. And that in of itself is an amazing form of gameplay, but it requires a lot of time, a lot of energy, and you have to think very differently. Role-playing gamers like to have adventure, feel heroic, do all kinds of interesting things, but they need rules for progression and for combat. So this gives you the action, tactile combat you need for small skirmishes, or the rule set you need to do anything you want to do in the ancient world. All right, great. That's been our summary today. I hope you've had fun hanging out and listening along. I'm really proud of the game. You can get it in 2 different ways. The PDF is usually on sale for like $4.99. Okay, it's about 68 pages, 66 pages. It's in a small little black book format because I'm a big fan of Mark Miller and Traveller, and I just love the portability of the small books. You can get it for $4.99. I have it on Drive-Thru RPG. Sometimes I'll put it on sale. Sometimes the price will go up and down. Just pick and choose the time. If you're a member of my Patreon page, and if you're in the supporter rank, you get a copy of everything I've ever written just by being a supporter, which is a really economical way to do it if you like to get involved and have conversations about the rules. Like, hey, I find this one rule for crossbows, it seems unrealistic. I engage with people and talk to them all the time. The second option, which is in limited supply, is a print run. These are 5.5 by 8-inch perfect bound books. I've got about 250 in stock right now. If you want one of those, it's sent out to you media mail. The prices usually run around $10 or so, $9.99. But they're great. It's fun to have a physical copy of a book. You can read it and the rules, take it with you anywhere, stick it in your back pocket, as opposed to having a really big, thick, you know, hardback bound book full of $25,000 worth of concept art. I really want to get this game in people's hands who just want to play a game that has really interesting rule sets. Thanks for listening. And yeah, if you ever have any questions or comments, let me know. My YouTube channel is a lot of times a great place to communicate. If you're one of the patrons on my Patreon page, that's also a place to communicate with people directly as well. And thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoy checking out this cool game. And we'll talk to you again real soon.